Welcome to Lumina, the House of Education. This podcast exists to make a difference. Here, real stories from classrooms, schools, and education systems are brought together to reshape what education is meant to be in modern times. We talk about leadership, responsibility, values, and the human side of learning. This is a space for education leaders who are done reacting and ready to lead. Let's begin.
Welcome in. Today, we are taking a really close look at what feels like a fundamental contradiction right at the heart of K-12 education. We've got some research, some analyses, and data exploring two really critical issues.
That's right. First, there's the systemic pressure that's just driving teachers out of the profession. And second, the priorities of school leaders.
The people who select the very tools those teachers are supposed to be using every single day.
Let's be honest, though. The way we usually talk about the teacher shortage is, well, it's usually wrong.
Yeah.
Our sources challenge that standard thinking right from the get-go.
Right. The public conversation always seems to focus on recruitment, finding new people.
But our mission today is to show why that diagnosis completely misses the point.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Here's the core idea, and it's a little uncomfortable based on one of the analyses we looked at. When you hear about the teacher shortage, it's all job fairs, signing bonuses, recruitment campaigns. But the data from a major study makes it really clear. The problem isn't getting people in. It's not about entry.
It's about sustainability.
Sustainability.
What's so fascinating here is that the sources force us to shift the entire framework. This isn't a supply problem.
It's a system problem.
It is a fundamental system problem. The McKinsey analysis really underscores this. You can spend all the money in the world on recruitment, but if the job itself is impossible, those new people,
they'll just leave.
They'll be gone in 2, maybe 3 years. We have to stop asking how we get new people in and start asking, why does the system push out the dedicated people who are already there?
So if all that recruitment is, if not pointless, then at least really inefficient, what's the actual cost of that constant churn on a school?
The cost is huge. It's stability, it's experience, it's institutional knowledge. Every single time a teacher leaves, that emotional and practical burden, it just shifts to the staff who remain.
And that just makes their workload worse?
Exactly. It makes it worse, which leads to more people leaving. It becomes this self-fulfilling feedback loop of burnout.
Okay, so let's dig into that burnout. Why are they leaving? It's not that teachers don't care, it's burnout. It's that the system keeps layering on new demands without ever taking anything away.
That layering.
Yeah.
That is the critical factor. That's what creates the tipping point. The sources describe this accumulation of responsibilities that goes so far beyond just teaching.
Right.
Teachers are expected to manage a classroom with more students who have really complex, often intensive needs.
But with no extra help.
But without corresponding increases in support staff.
Exactly.
And crucially, the job is just drowning in things that aren't teaching. The emotional labor alone is massive. You're a social worker, a therapist, a crisis manager. But then there's the administrative load. Covering classes during shortages, spending hours logging behavior data just for district compliance, processing IEPs, the constant data collection.
Yes. And the analysis states that this huge workload is layered onto a role that was simply never designed to carry this much weight. That's a powerful analogy. It's like asking a sedan to haul the load of a semi-truck every single day, and then you act surprised when the engine blows out.
That's a perfect way to put it.
The sources make it clear that for teachers, the tipping point is often everything around the classroom. It's the constant urgency, the lack of reliable support, and just this crushing feeling that no matter how much you give,
It's never enough.
it's never enough. Not for the students, not for the district, not for the parents.
And that is a profound systemic failure. This confirms that retention problems cannot be fixed with, catchy slogans or one-time bonuses. They require a deep and frankly difficult redesign of the core components.
So changing the workload itself.
Changing the workload, creating real support structures, and expanding the decision-making boundaries for the teachers themselves.
That structural failure, that brings us directly to the people who manage the system, the ones who make the decisions about the tools teachers use. If system redesign is the answer, we have to look at the school leaders.
Right. If teachers are leaving because the job is impossible and their tools are inadequate, then we have to ask about the quality of those tools. And this transitions us perfectly to the RAND interview study we looked at. It tried to figure out what school leaders, so principals, district admins, what they see as the key parts of quality instructional materials.
What do the people making the buying decisions actually prioritize when they look at a new curriculum?
The study gives us this crucial insight into that administrative mindset. They found that school leaders valued things that help teachers implement the curriculum and met regulatory requirements.
So they prioritize what made the district's life easier and what made the teacher's immediate life administratively smoother.
Exactly. The two critical dimensions they prioritized most were usability and standards alignment.
Okay, let's be specific for you, the listener. What do those terms actually mean in a school? Usability. That means the curriculum is easy to roll out on a Monday morning. It's laid out clearly, it doesn't require a ton of prep, and the teacher can quickly figure out how to teach it.
Right. And standards alignment just means the materials tick all the compliance boxes. It ensures the district is meeting state and federal metrics.
Okay.
But this raises a really important, critical question. What did these leaders not prioritize? Because this is the gap. This is what connects right back to that retention crisis we were just talking about.
I was really struck by that contrast. The study found that way fewer school leaders identified things like cultural relevance or language acquisition supports and robust social-emotional learning supports, or SEL, as being essential.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the tension so clearly. Leaders valued materials that streamlined compliance and made implementation easy. Basically, the path of least administrative resistance.
But they were overlooking the exact features that address the problems driving teachers out.
Yes, they overlook the SEL and the cultural relevance that are designed to help with that massive emotional labor and the complex needs of students.
So the leaders are choosing materials that solve the district's compliance problems, but they aren't choosing materials that solve the teacher's burnout problem.
That's it. That explains why teachers feel so unsupported. They're being given tools built for regulatory rules while ignoring the tools they need for human connection and for crisis management.
Let's move to how these materials actually get into the classroom. Section 3 gets into the selection process itself. School leaders reported using 3 main methods. One was district-led, one was school-level, and then there was a collaborative one.
And a key takeaway here for you, the learner, is all about buy-in. School leaders were just so much more satisfied with the process when they or their teachers were actually involved.
That just makes sense.
It's a huge signal for districts. You have to engage the people on the ground, the ones who actually use the materials, if you want successful adoption.
Of course. If you were a teacher, you'd want a voice in the tools that shape your entire workday. But once those materials are chosen, leaders have this really tricky balancing act. They have to balance teacher autonomy, letting teachers adapt to specific student needs, with fidelity of curriculum implementation, which is making sure the curriculum is taught exactly as it's written.
And this is where the rubber meets the road. School leaders influence how teachers use materials by creating that buy-in. But their pre-existing idea of what quality means, that directly influences how hard they push for fidelity versus allowing for autonomy.
Hold on, if the retention issue is about an impossible workload, why are we focusing so much on the materials? Shouldn't leaders be prioritizing, I don't know, fewer meetings, hiring more support staff?
That's a great question, and the sources really show that tension. See, the district can control which curriculum gets purchased much more easily than they can control state mandates or, the social issues students bring to school.
So they focus on what they can control.
They focus on what they can mandate, the curriculum. And the conflict happens when that curriculum lacks those crucial SEL supports. A teacher has the autonomy to adjust for a child having a crisis in the corner.
But the principal is measured on fidelity.
Exactly. So the pressure is on the teacher to stick to the script, the standards aligned, but SEL deficient script, even when that script is actively failing the student in front of them.
So if a leader only thinks usability and compliance matter, they push for fidelity. But that forces the teacher into an impossible choice. Either follow the curriculum or manage the emotional crisis in the room.
And that choice is a massive contributor to burnout. That internal system conflict, the demand for fidelity using materials that ignore the human crisis, that is the core mechanism driving the retention crisis.
Now, let's talk about a huge disruptive force that kind of broke through some of these priorities. The pandemic. Section 4 looks at how the COVID-19 disruption really changed how leaders saw things.
The sources show a really measurable shift in priorities during the pandemic, and it was driven by pure necessity. Leaders realized that their existing definition of quality just wasn't enough when instruction moved online and student needs just skyrocketed.
What really stood out to leaders during the peak of COVID?
They grew profoundly more concerned about student engagement in a remote setting. And, critically, the immediate and urgent need for robust social-emotional learning supports within the curriculum.
The need for SEL wasn't a theory anymore.
No, it was tied to attendance, to basic functioning. Remote learning exposed the trauma and isolation in a way that just couldn't be ignored anymore. And that urgency forced leaders to look beyond basic standards and focus on the factors they used to call less essential.
They also realized the crucial importance of having materials that are, available, accessible, or adaptable for online instruction. This is more than just a PDF.
Oh, much more. It implies a newfound interest in integrated technology supports. Materials that could handle online learning, provide feedback, and offer digital resources when physical access was impossible.
It's a massive shift. The urgent needs of remote learning forced leaders to redefine what quality even meant,
tying it to the social and digital needs of the student, rather than just the administrative needs of the district.
And this shift provides a really clear roadmap for redesigning the system, which is laid out in the RAND study's recommendations.
Let's review those key policy recommendations. First, districts should provide specific guidance for school leaders on how to assess and select materials for cultural relevance.
So actively look for materials that reflect diverse students, not just default to generic content.
Precisely. Second, in direct response to that COVID experience, districts and schools should actively seek materials that provide robust, integrated SEL supports.
Which directly addresses the emotional labor we talked about that's driving teachers out.
It should be core to the curriculum, not an afterthought. And third, they recommend the districts provide leaders with training to support teachers' use of materials thoughtfully.
Meaning more than just teach the script.
Yes. Moving beyond that mandate, and instead providing informed support on how to balance fidelity with the autonomy, teachers need to meet complex student needs.
So, what does this all mean when we put it together? The sources show us this really clear tension in K-12 education. We have a retention crisis driven by an unsustainable system that demands too much emotional and administrative labor from teachers. And we have school leaders who, traditionally, focused their material choices on compliance and just ease of use.
The sources show the true bottleneck is this reluctance to change the system itself. It has been easier for the system to recruit new teachers to face an impossible job.
And to admit the structure is flawed.
Than to admit the organizational structure is fundamentally flawed.
The increased concern about SEL and technology after COVID, that offers a powerful opportunity for a real system redesign. If leaders adopt these recommendations, they move away from only focusing on compliance and begin to address the real needs of both students and staff.
Indeed. The system requires redesign, not just recruitment slogans. And that brings us to our final thought for you to consider, which ties everything together. We know the pandemic forced this urgent recognition of the need for SEL and accessible materials. But will this momentum lead to a fundamental redesign of workloads and support structures, making teaching truly sustainable?
And this is the risk.
Or will SEL supports and technology integration simply become two more complex things layered onto the teacher's already overflowing plate? Two more items for leaders to check for fidelity, exacerbating the very retention crisis they were meant to solve.
The success hinges entirely on whether leaders use these new priorities to reduce the systemic burden, or just use them as more requirements for compliance. That distinction right there will define the future of K-12 education.
Education doesn't change through slogans. It changes when leaders are willing to look again at what really matters. If this episode raised a question worth sitting with, then it did its job. This is Lumina, the House of Education. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow.